everyone. My name is Vidya Murali. I'm the author of the book How to Survive in a Scale-Up Business. Today, we are going to talk about burnout in young, high growth businesses. And I have two lovely guests with me, Liz and Avril. Liz, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Liz Hosmer. I've got more than 20 years experience in leadership roles in operations and strategy in consumer businesses, and I spent about half of that time at Amazon. And in the last 4 years or so of my full-time working life, I was in scale-ups in senior leadership roles, and I am currently working as an independent advisor and consultant, and I'm in the process of becoming a coach.
Thanks, Liz. Avril?
Hi, I'm Avril Lobo. I have about 15 years of experience working in really high pressure, fast-paced environments, both in India and here in the UK. Half of my career as well was in corporate, was at Amazon. I'm now working for myself, and I specialize in working with senior leaders who are building forward after big burnout, especially when they're navigating complexities like identity loss, redefining success, and just getting really comfortable with their story and charting their path forward.
Thanks both. I forgot to mention, I'm also had 6.5 years in Amazon. That's how I met these two lovely ladies, and that's why we are here together. So we're going to talk about burnout, and before we go into more actionable insights, I want to understand what your experience have been on this, difficult experience. Starting with Avril, what's your experience been?
Yeah, I've talked about this quite transparently, and I do it from the point of view that people who hear about my story and my journey might start to recognize some of those, symptoms or markers even before they come to full burnout. I think for me, when I fully burned out, I was probably in burnout maybe for 3 to 4 years before that. And when I did finally burn out, it took at least 2 years to kind of come through that. And even then, 6 years on, I still live with some of the residual impact. And it's meant that I have to have so much more responsibility and care around not just how I work, but also how I live and tend to myself. So yeah, I think for me, the main thing I want to share for anyone who's listening is my experience was covered in a lot of shame. I thought, how could this have possibly happened to me? I'm a high performer. I'm ticking all of these success markers. I'm at the top of my game. I've got all of this good feedback. But I think it was for me, burnout has really been that experience to really take a deeper look at what kind of patterns I brought with myself into certain environments, why I was attracted to certain environments, and why I thought I should sort of stay longer than I should have when things got challenging, complex, or difficult. So burnout is so much more than, what gets talked about in social media around it's about workload, take the vacation, have a bubble bath. It's just so much more than that. It really is taking a much harder, deeper look at what's important to you and more importantly, reclaiming your choice about how you're going to build forward. So yeah, that was my experience, and hard as it was, I'm very grateful that I'm where I am right now, and I can choose differently.
Thanks, Avril, for sharing so authentically. And I totally resonate with this idea of burnout not being a badge of honor. I don't think there's anything sexy about it. Of course, you came out with a lot of resilience, but it's very difficult experience and a long experience. So prevention is definitely something that we should strive for. Liz, what's your experience been? You're on mute, Liz.
Classic Zoom error. So I really sleepwalked into it, like I think probably many people do. I had never had any kind of mental health problem before, and I had this internal narrative of I'm tough, I can handle anything, I'm resilient, I'm okay. And it happened. Like Avril, it was going on for a while, and it was across a couple of roles as well in two kind of different businesses. They were both scale ups though, and then the common themes were, I was being asked to deliver in what I can see now were really impossible circumstances, and I wasn't set up for success. And when I explained what I needed to be able to deliver, I was essentially told, stop complaining and just get on with it. And so I started to believe that it didn't take much actually for me to believe that it was my fault, and I just needed to kind of work harder, do more. And of course I was juggling, things outside of work, and my life outside of work was very positive, but I had a hard time enjoying it. And it was just a
Mm,
lot juggling all of that. So the first time around, I simply left the company, and I took 6 weeks off before starting my new role. And when I joined the new company, things were good for a while. Um, but after that, because it was fresh and exciting, but after that honeymoon period, it all came back. And eventually I left again. I left that role. So my solution was always retreat. But this time I knew that something was pretty wrong, and I just couldn't physically and mentally bring myself to just go into another senior leadership role, which is what I had done the past time. It was like, oh, I just need to go to a different environment. I just need to
mm,
go someplace new, and it'll be fine. So that's when I started doing freelance advisory and consulting work. And that was just a huge improvement because, and it's similar to what Avril said, I'm so much more protective of, previously it was work was first, family and friends were second, and I was last. And that's exactly the opposite of what it should be, right? And so now I do it that way. And
mm,
work is last, I'm first. And I spent a lot of time on, self-care, and I'm really careful about my workload, and I'm able to be careful about who I work with, what type of work I do, and so on. So it's really putting that protective kind of bubble around myself and understanding what my priorities are. And
mm.
but it wasn't until a while later, and it was really the tail end of COVID, when people started talking about burnout. And because I didn't have the words to describe the experience I'd had. It was just, oh, it was bad, and I got out. But towards the end of COVID, people started talking about burnout, and they started talking about like what it is and the symptoms and everything. And I thought, gosh, that's familiar. And so it was really helpful then to be able to put a name on it, even though that doesn't really change anything. It felt good to know that it was a thing, and it wasn't just me.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing this. Lots of pointers that came out of your description. The feeling of not having agency, of not having control. I can't do this. I want to do this, but I can't do this. As a woman, as a mom, juggling different things. And also, I think as women, we have a tendency to blame ourselves when things go wrong. That also came out to me as striking. Probably men less so, blaming themselves. But I'm very curious because when I worked with you last, it was on Amazon. It was a quite high pressure, high demanding environment, and you were, just rocking it. And what's the difference in environment like that versus like a young, high growth environment like Scala that's structurally more prone to this type of issues. I've written about that in my book. The uncertainties, the immaturity, a lot of changes. Human brains tend to go into this flight or fright mode when things don't are not stable, and that's when it becomes chronic. And then you talk about this agency, lack of agency as well, builds up. But what was it for you that this environment particularly was more susceptible?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think in the days that we worked together, it was in the retail part of Amazon, and in established businesses, right? You were in books, I was in like software and video, media, software and video games. And it was like I knew the rules, and I understood like what resources I had available to me. Everyone understood. I had what I needed. The culture made sense. It was cohesive, and these were relatively stable businesses. Yes, they were growing, and yes, there was pressure, of course, because it was Amazon, and we had to deliver for the shareholders and everything. But I think, yeah, I think the thing that jumps in my head is I knew the rules and I understood, and everyone was kind of on the same page about like what good looks like, how to succeed in that environment. And there were enough like feedback mechanisms that I could like chart my path and understand what I needed to be doing to be perceived the way that you perceived me. And it felt really good. But then I think because of that, and because in some ways, yes, it was very challenging, but in some ways it was easy because of all that structure. And then I went into this scale up environment just completely unprepared, and I was just blindsided by all of the different challenges that kind of environment present. I was just completely unprepared.
Yeah, and no one tells us these things, right? Like, I
No,
don't
no.
know. Did anyone tell you before you went for scale ups, like, hey, this is
Well,
a completely different environment?
well, I will tell you that I had a colleague, probably someone who left Amazon um maybe a couple years before you did, and very very high performer, very well respected person, went to this other company, which was not a scale up, but it was a smaller, newer business than Amazon. And he said to me, we met up a couple of times, and he said to me, I told him I was thinking about leaving, and he was like, just be ready, that right now you completely take for granted what a well-run company you work in right now. And like it's not like that kind of out in the outside world. And obviously it stuck with me, but it didn't really capture. It was useful, but it didn't really capture like the full kind of picture of like what I was in for.
Yeah, yeah, I can totally relate to that. And also logic, right? As like everything was so logical in a more mature organization. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Somebody's going to find an answer. But then you go into this world of, less logic, more emotions, and that becomes a whole new gate. You need to learn new
Mm,
rules or set rules.
yeah.
So we talked about the structural differences that can lead to burnout, but let's talk about what individuals can do about building some protective mechanisms. So there's a reason why people join scale-ups. It's exciting, it's growing, it's dynamic. They have uncapped financial gains. There are all these good reasons, but there needs to be um, ways people can protect themselves from this from happening. It's because we also talked about this a little earlier about how anything to do with brain can take a lot of time to heal than our bodies. So we don't want people to get burnt out and then think about what to do about this. Ideally, we want them to create a work life that is protecting them from falling into the situation, because it's quite a long recovery journey and a long impact. I'll come to you, Avril, as an expert in this area. If you were to give some advice to individuals who are either joining scale ups or working in high pressure scale ups, how can they build these protective mechanisms?
The first thing that came to mind as you were speaking there, like for me, the first thing is go in with your eyes wide open. And I think with you having read some of your, having had the privilege of read some of your material for your book, I think this is the thing about having a high level of self-awareness is the one thing that you can use to protect yourself. Because I know, we talk about things like advocate for your needs and things like that, but if you don't know what your needs are, it's going to be very challenging to advocate for them. And Vidya, as you rightly pointed out, like on this side of burnout, the journey it's a long, hard journey to recovery. So yeah, absolutely. We want more people to be more aware of what are the things that make them tick, including, if you love the thrill of being in a scale up, you love the thrill of being in fast pace. What are your values in play there? And also wanted to pick up, Liz, on something you shared. There's a reason at some point something within us starts to let work track up and everything else kind of falls down. So being aware, I think, first and foremost, of how we operate and why we operate. And there's no shame in that. There's just, it's just the honesty and integrity of it. I think for me, there's three things in regards to that. First is if you're going to have your awareness raised, it's going to help to have someone else do that for you. That's not necessarily always going to be your manager. They're there to deliver results. They're just as, sort of pressured with things. So for me, I think what helped me, and I know that it supports a lot of the people I partner with, is, get yourself a mentor, somebody who is role modeling what you want to be able to see and do. Have a mentor or have a leadership coach or someone who can be that external thinking or accountability partner. With doing the work of awareness, you've also got to act on it. So it's not just about, yep, I go to those sessions and I go back into the environment and then continue on. So making some of those changes is going to be uncomfortable, but also coming back, to the work around what does my energy look like? What is the energy I'm bringing to this environment? What is it that I'm taking? There's that reciprocity, being clear on that. What are my boundaries that I walk into this place with and that I want to hold in my relationships or with my work? So I think, again, sort of when you've got that support model doing some of this work. And the third thing I wrote that for me is really close to my heart and it's really hard earned wisdom. Rest is not earned at the end of your best work and your high performance. Rest is part of the work. Rest is part of high performance. And I come primarily from a culture. I'm originally Indian. I live and work here in the UK. But I came from a culture where rest is seen as being lazy. And, many of us will have different types of cultural or social conditioning around what it means to pause or slow down. And it sort of almost feels like it's the opposite of being in a scale up or a high pressure environment, and it doesn't need to be. So I think just the third point that I would add there is rest is part of high performance. And have a think again, when you're doing your awareness work, have a think around what that means to you. What are your receptive forms of rest? It doesn't have to always be sleep, can be being with friends, nurturing a hobby, exercise. So when we talk about, self-care, it's so much more than I'm going to take a holiday and a bubble bath. Those are good. But have a real think about how you're proactively choosing rest, but not when you're in burnout at the end of it. That's a much harder process to embrace. I hope that's helpful, Vidya.
Yeah, that's super useful. And I again picked a couple of things there. The self-awareness, I just wanted to add like it's okay if you're not suited for a scale-up environment. There are other environments that you can go and work. I people,
Yeah.
especially you're in early stage of career, they feel they have to fit into every environment, every role. It took me a while
Mm.
for me to realize what kind of environment, what kind of role suits me. I don't work well in very operational firefighting roles. I like to work on more longer term strategic planning roles, or I need some level of structure, but not too much structure. So, understanding that and admitting that to yourself and starting to say no. That's the first time I realized, okay, I kind of know where I fit well. So that's no shame. There's like opportunities for everyone. That came up to me. And also on self-care, I worked in environments where people go and party all night and then they come early in the morning as a badge of honor. I have been like the last one in the party and then I'm turned up in the morning with, I don't know, hangover, whatever, right? And that's not a competition. And people have different needs for rest. If you're an introvert, highly sensitive person, you probably need more rest and these things will going to overwhelm you. So there's no need to have that peer pressure and comparing yourself and trying to push yourself hard. Have your own boundaries and this, yeah, just want to say that there's no shame. You do what your body wants you to do for the basic survival, but also for thriving. Yeah, those two things came up and you talked about self-awareness and care. Liz, I want to come to you. Listening to these things and with your own experience of it, what do you think you would have done differently to kind of protect yourself from it if you had to go back?
I think there are a few things, and some of these are echo a little bit some points that the two of you have made. So I will keep it brief. I think the biggest thing I didn't do that I really regret is I didn't have a habit of talking to people outside work about work.
Mm,
And I think if I'd had the space to do that, I would have seen simply by it's that thing of like talking helps you think or writing helps you think, right? And it's not even that I would have needed somebody to say back to me, okay, well that sounds like a pretty bad environment. me describing it might have been enough. I don't know, but I guess I always just felt like, oh, they don't want to hear about work, like, and my spouse, like, he works in such a different environment, like, he's not going to understand anyway the kind of stuff I'm talking about, and like, when I get together with my friends, I don't want to, I wanted to just like put it in a box and just not deal with it. But I think if I'd had that habit, which is a very healthy thing, and I have plenty of friends outside work. You can find these people. Like, I could tell you right now who the right people would have been to have these conversations with. Um, I think that would have helped a lot because it would have helped me see what I couldn't see.
Mm,
I think the second thing is, if you see yourself falling into that trap of putting things in the wrong order, work, everybody else, and me, you have to like just stop that immediately and figure out what you have to do. And for me, like, when I'm in a demanding work situation, that backwards ranking is like impossible for me to resist. And so I've had to just reduce my work hours, because like I don't know, maybe one day I'll figure it out, but I don't know how to put myself first in those situations. So you've got to figure that out, and if you see that happening, you need to like stop it in its tracks somehow. And the third thing is learning to recognize the signs of a work environment that is burnout inducing, and either avoid them in the first instance. And Vidya, you talk about this in the book, or if you can, just leave that situation, or figure out a way to kind of redirect the situation. And then the last thing is just recognizing that it's not your fault. Sometimes you see stuff that kind of blames burnout on individuals, and I don't think that's right. So recognizing that if you're in that situation, it's not your fault, and that working harder is not going to fix it.
yeah. Thanks, Liz. I again picked a few things here. You talk about talking, right? It reminds me, um, when I was going through something difficult in work in one of the scale-ups, I described to somebody who was not working, right? And this person was like, "Oh my God, that sounds really horrible. You need to get out of that situation." And I was like, "Oh, this person doesn't know because she's not working, and maybe this is all new to her." So I didn't actually take that as a serious thing. But this is why I wrote this book. Nobody talks about it because everybody is so busy going through it. And either they're busy working hard in this environment and they might be happy, thriving, great, or they're working hard and struggling, but they don't have the network to go and talk to people who will not just give the third party view, a reflection, but also understand a little bit of the challenges and go, you know what, this is actually happening here as well. It's a structural thing. So it took me a while, many attempts, to realize that this problem is not my problem, it's a more structured problem, and that different people respond to it differently. Some people are just fine in that environment, some people need more support, some people need a different environment. So it's very nuanced in that sense, but structurally those patterns and problems I talk about these toxic patterns in the businesses that exist. um, and prioritizing as a mom, especially, Liz, you talk about when work becomes number one, then you need to stop. My view is sometimes work does become number one, and I feel it's okay, but it shouldn't be long term. Like, maybe I
Right.
start a new role. For the first months, it becomes number one because of the change, but I'm very conscious that it doesn't become that forever. And I have a teenage daughter. I'm very aware that she's going to go out to uni in a few years. So every conversation I have is an opportunity for me to connect with her. So that's important to me. If I don't have time and energy to do that, then I will be very sad, and that probably, you know, build up my anxiety bucket and put me up for something not good. So that awareness is this important. But yeah, I mean, there's no perfect magic solution for always having me time and prioritizing a family and then work. We're all juggling. There's always a compromise, but for me, it's about the timing and the facing of it.
I think that's a really important point, and I'm glad you made that point. there will be times when it's okay sometimes, like if you have a big deadline or like a big launch or something, to put work first. And like it can be exhilarating, it can be fun, it can be exciting
Mm.
of like I worked really hard for, a few days or a couple of weeks, and I delivered this thing and I'm really proud and now I can relax. That's very normal and that's very healthy. But it becomes problematic when, as you say, it's kind of the default all the time.
Yeah, when it becomes a norm, and I'll talk about boundaries where, working in an environment, you're constantly expected to be on Slack after hours, you're being asked questions and, you're asked to
Mm,
respond to it, which means that you're basically not switching off. Your brain is constantly in that go, 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 go mode, and that's going to prime you for, all kinds of issues. Burnout can be one of them as well.
mm,
So yeah, so we talked about these, what individuals can do. Um, to prevent burnout, but sadly, many of them experience it and maybe listening right now as well and thinking, oh God, I'm already in that stage. If someone feels that, what can they do? I'll come to you, Avril, again as an expert in this area. If someone is feeling, I'm already experiencing symptoms of burnout, I am, agitated more often, I'm feeling very tired, I don't have the the zest for life, I am, everything looks a bit bleak for me. And thinking about work, like what Liz said, my body says no, I don't want to even go near there.
Yeah.
What should they do? What would be your guidance?
I think my first thing, and I will say this from my experience and from a lot of people I've heard, you need to talk to someone. And sometimes that someone needs to be someone outside of work. Um, I I mean, there is the whole having conversations with managers and what can work do to support you. But if we're looking specifically at if you know you're in the throes of burnout, and the idea of waking up to face the day is just no thanks. um I have done, and this is what I would recommend, is speak to a care provider, most likely your GP. A lot of GPs here in the UK especially are quite familiar with burnout. They're seeing a lot of people come through because burnout, and having the sense of like blah, is it's not a, you'll take the day off or the week off. It's going to take a lot more, and sometimes by the time we are in the throes of burnout, it's starting to affect our health. And that's why, we can't just get our energy levels up. We can't just sleep another 8 hours and get it back. So, speaking to a care provider, specifically a GP, if there's noticeable symptoms around low mood, severe anxiety, panic attacks, that was my experience, speak to a therapist or a mental health professional. I would caution against going to coaching unless your coach is also a dual trained therapist as well. I mean, there's a place for coaching, but if you're in that sort of like, I need support ASAP, please consider speaking to someone and doing it fast. Again, there's no shame in having these conversations. Prevention is so much better. And also, if you're in that place, then being able to put the appropriate treatment plans in place, having the appropriate care partners, knowing who your community is, how you're going to look after yourself day to day is important. And then I think from there, having the conversation around what's work going to look like, because it's hard to be in burnout and then continue to be, I'm going to just be the high performer and all
Hmm.
of that. So I think also coming into a little bit of a, what adjustments do I need to make? Do I need to slow down? Do I then need to speak? So I hope I've answered the question, but my first thing is speak to a proper care professional to support yourself.
Yeah. So I see a lot of high profile leaders openly declaring, like, I'm facing the burnout, I'm taking a break. That
Hmm.
is encouraging because the stigma is coming down. However,
Yeah.
on an individual level, I think there is still a challenge because somebody experiencing a mental health issue is not able to guarantee timelines to return, like, to work, they're taking a break. While if you're even having a surgery, you can say, like, okay, I'm having a surgery, I'm going to come back. So that creates this ambiguity and uncertainty about, as an individual, you're already, like, you're biased because your brain is acting that way, and then to
Yeah.
not be able to promise when you're going to go back to work can become really, stigmatizing. And how do
Mm.
people manage that?